Although there are over 100,000 prisons around the world, in this video we will talk about the most terrifying prisons. You will face escape stories, dangerous mafias, and fascinating yet terrifying mysteries. We will talk about tortures inflicted on prisoners and stories of resistance. We kindly ask you to like the video and leave a comment. If you're ready, let's begin. This picturesque island was once a hell for prisoners, the Alcatraz prison, also known as the Rock. This place became famous for its strict security system and the challenging escape conditions. Alcatraz also has a history that has inspired many imaginations and is a subject of fear and legend. This place has hosted many famous mafias. Al Capone, one of America's most famous gangsters. During his time at Alcatraz, he suffered from health problems. Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz. He is known for writing books about birds. However, his work with birds was done not in Alcatraz, but in his previous prison. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. Their escape attempt in 1962 is still a topic of debate. They used fake heads and a makeshift raft in their escape. George Machine Gun Kelly. He was imprisoned here for kidnapping a wealthy businessman. Although there were many uprisings and rebellious movements at Alcatraz prison, the most notable and discussed events were the escape attempts made by inmates in an effort to gain their freedom. However, there is one major rebellion and uprising in the history of Alcatraz. On May 2, 1946, a group of inmates succeeded in bypassing the prison's security system, obtained weapons, and then initiated a rebellion. 6 inmates killed a guard in the B block, took his weapon, and then took other guards hostage. This led to the outbreak of the rebellion. The inmates managed to take several guards hostage in the hope of escaping the prison. To suppress the rebellion, federal security forces were sent to launch an assault on Alcatraz. Military forces and Marines arrived to regain control of the situation and initiated an operation against the inmates. In the end, some of the leaders were killed, while others were recaptured and placed in solitary confinement. Several inmates received life sentences. This rebellion marked a turning point that further strengthened security measures at Alcatraz. After the incident, tighter security protocols and stronger surveillance were put in place. Alcatraz Island was initially used by the U.S. Army in the 1850s for military bases and forts. The island's isolated nature made it an ideal location for holding prisoners. In 1934, the island was transformed into a federal prison under the control of the U.S. Department of Justice and became known as the Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. Alcatraz was associated with serious human rights violations during that period. Inmates were often subjected to unnecessary physical and psychological pressures. The prison's management was known for its strict disciplinary system. Not only inmates, but also the prison staff and their families lived on the island. This created psychological stress for the prison workers, as social life on the island was very limited. After Alcatraz was abandoned, many people claimed that the island was a haunting place with great energy. Tourists and visitors have shared numerous stories about spirits wandering the island, despite it being empty. Some visitors believe they have heard noises in the prison and think the prison is reanimated. Many of the inmates held at Alcatraz use secret codes and symbols among themselves. These codes served as a means of communication, either to avoid security measures or to send messages for uprisings. Sometimes these codes were discovered by the prison's security forces and used to uncover network operations. Alcatraz, not only a prison, but also a symbol of isolation and freedom. The island's isolated structure reveals what the human spirit can endure, both physically and emotionally. Interestingly, Alcatraz Island was occupied by a group of Native American activists from 1969 to 1971. This group declared the island as their own land in protest against the government's violation of Native American rights. This event marked the beginning of a major movement for the rights of Native Americans and is remembered in history as the occupation of Alcatraz. Today, Alcatraz is one of the most famous historical tourist destinations located in the San Francisco Bay. After the prison closed in 1963, the island became part of the U.S. National Park Service in 1972 and is protected under the name Alcatraz Island National Park. Along with its dark past as a prison, its natural beauty and rich history attract great interest from tourists. San Quentin is located in Marin County, California, United States, on the San Francisco Bay. Founded in 1852, this prison is the oldest prison in the state of California and has been associated with many important events and people throughout history. San Quentin is located in Marin County on the north shore of San Francisco Bay. It is approximately 30 kilometers from San Francisco city center. Due to its seaside location, it is notable for both isolation and view for inmates and staff. San Quentin State Prison was established in 1852. This comes just a few years after California became a state of the United States. California joined the United States in 1850. It was originally built to house prisoners due to rising crime rates in California. San Quentin was originally established to house both male and female inmates, but female inmates were transferred to another facility in the 1930s. It was built to house California's most serious criminals. It is also the state's only death row execution center for male inmates. Executions of male prisoners in California were carried out here. Throughout its history, it has been known for being both a maximum security prison and rehabilitation programs. San Quentin's modern capacity is determined as 3,082 inmates. However, overcrowding, a common occurrence in American prisons, also applies to San Quentin. The number of inmates in the prison often exceeds capacity. For example, as of 2022, there are approximately 4,000 inmates at San Quentin. This number means that the prison is used 130 to 140% above its capacity. San Quentin is the only male death row prison in the state of California. There are hundreds of inmates on death row, but the death penalty has been effectively suspended in California as of 2019. There are also inmates who serve short-term sentences or participate in rehabilitation programs at San Quentin. To reduce overcrowding, inmates are transferred to other prisons or placed in early release programs. The prison focuses on arts, education, and business programs to rehabilitate inmates. As in all prisons, horrific acts of violence occur at San Quentin Prison. Throughout San Quentin's history, many reports of both physical and psychological violence have emerged. In addition, the density of the prison population and various social dynamics have contributed to the increase in such incidents. Such situations are not limited to San Quentin. Similar problems are experienced in prisons in many parts of the world. But there were always people who spoke out against oppression, and one of them was George Jackson. George Jackson received a 1-year sentence for petty theft in the 1960s, but that sentence was extended and eventually commuted to life imprisonment. During his time in prison, he developed a political consciousness and adopted Marxism-Leninism. He particularly drew attention to racial discrimination and mistreatment in the U.S. prison system. George Jackson joined the Black Panther Party while in prison and became ideologically a part of this movement. The Black Panthers were an organization that fought against police brutality, racial discrimination, and the capitalist order. Jackson embraced the party's socialist ideology and strengthened the movement's revolutionary rhetoric through his writings. He rebelled against this system and lost his life in this uprising. Now let's talk about his struggle. Behind the Black Wall. George Jackson's Resistance, California's Riverside San Quentin prison, was a symbol of the dark years of the 1970s. Indeed, this was a place where revolutionary spirits were tried to be drowned, and the bodies of unjustly condemned people rotted in deep silence. But George Jackson, at age 29, was one of the most dangerous inmates inside this terrible place. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a leader, a revolutionary. Despite all the pain he suffered, a fire burned in his heart. Resistance for freedom. One morning when George opened his eyes, there was a heaviness in his chest. Indeed, even the cold stone walls of San Quentin seemed much harsher now. The walls of his cell felt like a symbol of death that was getting closer to him every day. But there was something that woke him up from his sleep. That night, in the corner of his cell, the voice of an old friend rang out. Jonathan Jackson, his younger brother. The maps, as they had drawn of the days of freedom they had dreamed of together, which had once told him of his revolutionary thoughts. But Jonathan had been shot by a police bullet in those days, years before George went to prison. Had been shot. The words he once said to George now echoed in his mind. George, there will only be one man left alive. But if you become part of a fire, that fire can turn into a forest fire. At that moment, a spark started to burn inside George. That spark would be enough to set fire not only to the rebellion in a cell, but also to the revolutionary spirit that surrounded the four walls of the prison. George's first real move came when a prisoner named Hector came to visit him. Hector was once the leader of a small gang, but the soul of a man imprisoned in prison for years had become part of the system. But George still saw anger, resistance in Hector. It wasn't hard to turn that anger into fire. One night, George and Hector met secretly in their cell. Hector took out an old piece of paper from his pocket and quickly wrote something on it. It was a call. It's an opportunity to organize the other inmates inside. This call was the beginning of a revolution. Many inmates began to embrace George's rebellion and quest for freedom and equality. Additionally, another prisoner named Franklin stated that when he heard about George's resistance, he immediately joined him. Franklin had been wrongfully imprisoned in prison for years. He saw himself as a victim of the system, and his freedom became a need rather than a dream that he took more and more for granted. The foundations of the resistance were about to be laid. George, Hector, and Franklin were holding secret meetings in the dark corners of San Quentin, urging each prisoner to be part of the resistance. But this was also becoming a dangerous game. The prison administration had noticed that the rebellion was growing, and this could be a harbinger of a dark end. A week later, having gathered their courage, George and his resistors took their first steps. Some knives found in the kitchen area were their first weapons. However, not only a physical, but also a psychological war had begun. Many inmates supported them, but some of them, former inmates like Jim and Tyrone, had fallen under the influence of a dark force. They became men who tried to stop the resistance and cooperated secretly with the prison administration. And one night, everything exploded. At midnight, the group led by George and Hector started the rebellion by targeting security booths and some police officers with knives they took from the kitchen. The screams coming from the cells were so strong that the walls inside the prison shook. As everything descended into chaos, George momentarily lost control of everything. The revolutionary spirit within him combined with anger and controlled him. Chief Constable Randall was the first man to enter the prison to calm things down. He always tried to make the climate of fear prevail in the prison and made torture routine in order to maintain order. But throughout the night, as he fought with all his might to counter George's resistance, other inmates in the prison united under his leadership. It was like a war. That night, the corridors between the cells turned into a battlefield. With every step, gunfire and people screaming as they tried to survive could be heard. While George and Hector moved from ward to ward to increase the resistance, a wall of fear was being built in different corners of the prison. But the fear didn't just come from administrators. Opposite George were people like Jim and Tyrone, men who had become the silent killers of the prison for years, trying to make the prisoners fight each other at every opportunity. They were determined to kill the resistance. When George realized that Jim and Tyrone were secretly trying to sabotage the rebellion, he thought it might be too late. Some corners of the prison were darkly filled with ghosts. George felt threatened with every step. Nobody was safe. Some prisoners were even moving, like shadows behind the walls and whispering to each other. One day, Darlene sneaked into George's cell and told him that this resistance would end. Darlene was an ex-con who had been incarcerated in prison for years, and now she thought of herself as the prison's undercover agent. He whispered to George that this resistance would come to an end, as if they had entered a maze. None of them could come out. Finally, at midnight, the prison, along with its entire staff, took action to silence George Jackson. A terrible conflict began. George and a few resistance fighters tried to survive among the prisoners they saw like ghosts in every corner. As George advanced to make a last show of resistance, the prison walls intoxicated him like a shadow. In the end, George Jackson remained like a dagger in the prison's chest, the only man left alive. His rebellion meant paying a price. But that price was so great that no wall could stop it. And that night, in the dark corners of San Quentin, among the prison's dead, George Jackson remained the symbol of freedom. The end. Sednaya is internationally known for its torture and human rights violations. The systematic torture applied to prisoners here is among the most significant human rights abuses committed by the Syrian government. Human rights organizations have highlighted the torture and mistreatment at Sednaya in numerous reports. Many former prisoners have stated that they were left alone in their cells for months without seeing any light, only allowed to go outside at specific times for food and water, and were kept under psychological pressure throughout this process. Psychological torture plays a significant role alongside physical torture. Prisoners are kept in constant fear and are manipulated with the threat of death. The accounts of survivors from Sednaya reveal the horrific nature of the prison. Many former prisoners describe how not only physical pain, but also psychological suffering posed a great threat. Prisoners often heard the sound of execution trucks late at night and felt the silent terror behind the executions. The mass executions at Sednaya have frequently been mentioned in reports by international human rights monitors. Some former prisoners have described seeing bodies outside their cells when they woke up in the mornings. Sednaya is not only one of Syria's most dangerous prisons, but it has also become a symbol of the punishment of regime opposition and the suppression of independence. This prison is known as a place that reflects the brutal nature of the Syrian civil war and Bashar al-Assad's government. The abuse at Sednaya has lasted for years and has shattered the lives of many innocent people. There is no indication that the conditions in Sednaya have improved after the fall of Bashar al-Assad. The continued strength of the Assad regime after the civil war and its ongoing human rights violations, despite international reactions, show that the brutal nature of Sednaya has not changed. However, with the end of the war and the re-establishment of control in some areas, the situation in Sednaya and other prisons may be influenced by future political developments.